This episode brought to you by Max Belts. Guys, are you looking for a perfect accessory to wear every single day for every single scenario? Well, you've come to the right place. We all know that nothing stands up to wear and tear like a good leather belt. If you're looking for the toughest leather belt on earth, then you've come to the right place. Max Belts. They're handcrafted in the USA by veterans who are serious about their craft. And if you're looking for a belt that's tough enough for your active lifestyle and help support those who've given so much to our country, look no further than Max Belts. It's the toughest belt on the planet. It's a perfect solution for casual or dress wear and ideal for utility and firearm carry. It's the highest caliber of American craftsmanship, and it also positively impacts our military charity partners. Once again, Max Belts, you can't go wrong with them. I wear them every day. They're the toughest belt on earth. And you can find all of this and so much more at maxbelts.com. All right, in 3, 2, 1, and we're live. Hey guys, welcome back to the DTD podcast, Dynamic Tales Delivered. This week, this guy is all over the place now. He's good friends with another friend of mine. His podcast is just blowing up right now at just insane speeds. 10 years, Army Special Forces. He's done a lot of deployments, got a lot of injuries, and we got a lot to talk about tonight. Please welcome in the studio, Nate Cornacchia. Did I say it right?
Cornacchia, but don't worry about it, brother. It's an impossible name to say right. My nickname was Corn Dog in the military because nobody could say it. So
all right, Corn Dog. So that might be what we go by. Listen, I'm so glad I got you on here. I talked to Brent. He put us in contact with each other, and your story is amazing to me. And here's why. Not just because of what you did, but you give an unhindered review at Special Forces. You don't care, good or bad. You will expose both of them. There's no where you're just a cheerleader for the cause. And that's what I find super interesting about what you do. And there's a lot of it that we're going to talk about tonight that you talk about, but you come from a pretty storied past, and your grandfather, your father, all of that kind of stuff that really, I don't think at first tied into your career, but did later on. You come from a very successful family, but the thing that you were the most successful about before this, you were a DJ, and we have to talk about being a DJ.
That was one of the things I was least successful at, I guess, from a, had I been as successful, the same level as making it as a Green Beret, I'd probably still be doing that. I was a local nightclub DJ at the University of Oregon. So at one of the nightclubs there while I was going to college. So yeah, although I did continue it all the way through my military career. I DJ'd all the military balls all the time for my unit, for Air Force units. I DJ'd out in Okinawa a few of the Air Force Special Warfare balls, including ours. So, I kept it up as a hobby here, which is a little rare for a Green Beret or a Special Forces dude to be doing. But, at this point, it's just a hobby.
It's a pretty cool hobby, not one that a lot of people can say that they did. I got to ask you though, since you were a DJ, you were in the Northwest, that's where my wife's from. What kind of music did you play when you DJ'd, and what was your favorite kind of music to play?
Electronic music. So I actually started DJing, God, what was this, 2007-ish? So right when electronic EDM music started becoming just popular, I had met a random happen chance, one of my buddies who moved up from Hollywood. He was a DJ in Hollywood, and his dad had cancer, and he was from the University of Oregon area. Moved home, bought a nightclub just because he wanted it, and I ended up meeting him, get introduced, and he taught me how to basically DJ electronic music before anybody was ever doing it. So that was the main thing that I DJ'd back when I used to do it again. But for music, man, I like so much stuff. I'll listen to a wide variety from country music, hip hop, electronic music. It doesn't really matter. If it's good music, I'll listen to it.
Yeah. You look at you and you think, no way that guy listened to EDM. I just can't see you with a pacifier in your mouth and glow sticks.
That was me, man, with the body paint and everything when I was 20, 21 years old. No doubt.
Just living your best life.
Yeah.
So, what did you go to school for? I've heard you tell stories about going to school, but I've never really heard, what the whole point was. I know that at one point you wanted to go to medical school, and
Yeah. So a lot of different times I went to school before I finished, right? So started college, University of Oregon, which I'm actually in my last term to graduate with my MBA master's degree from University of Oregon now. So 20 years later, I finally made it back. Went to University of Oregon, obviously talked about, was on the competitive cheerleading team there. That's a whole different story. Um, and then I made it about a year and a half, 2 years, and then realized college was not for me. Woke up one morning and decided I was going to chase my dreams and become a Green Beret at, 21, 22 years old at the time, which looking back on it made no sense for where I was at, where I was in life to think that I would be able to accomplish that goal. But, dad was a Green Beret. So knew about the path of 18 X-ray, which is our program that lets you come straight in off the street, go straight to basic training, special forces assessment selection. Not a high pass rate, but if you make it, you basically go to the Q course. If you make it through the Q course, you become a Green Beret. I managed to do that all my first try. So my entire military experience outside of 4 months in basic training was in Army Special Forces. So pretty unique in that way.
yeah, and definitely it was. But it's such different worlds that you're talking about. You're talking about competitive cheerleading, an EDM DJ, and then shooting people in the face. I mean, that
Yeah.
it's so many different worlds. I almost think that helped you along your path and helped you along being a Green Beret because you saw so many different kinds of worlds. And do you think it led to maybe you could be a little more empathetic when you're looking around and seeing different people, their struggles, and maybe not fitting into the situation?
Yeah, well, I mean, I ended up as a competitive cheerleader in college. That's not what I did in high school. So in high school, I was all-state baseball player. Thought I was going to go be a professional baseball player. Blew my knee out my senior year, like a lot of dudes do, and those dreams sort of disappeared from that injury, right? And that's how I sort of eventually. Then I was big, strong, athletic, so that's how I eventually got to the University of Oregon cheerleading side of things, was kind of as a fallback of athletics. But I grew up in doing three sport athlete my entire life. So, and, grew up with a Green Beret dad, extremely disciplined upbringing, all the things you would expect from that type of family. So, I had that upbringing, so I know, like, I kind of turned into and I wasn't. What's funny is I tell people that hear the story, they're like EDM DJ, out of control, college, but I wasn't. I kind of became the black sheep after high school. So I was valedictorian in my high school, almost had a 4.0 GPA, never did anything crazy, all athletics, and then when I got to college, that kind of like flew off the rails. And I realized, and I was pre-med. Sorry, I'd get back to that. I was pre-med when I first started school, and realized that wasn't for me, I guess. Anyway, drop out, or I don't drop out, but basically I decide I want to join the military, talk to my dad, and it's like, all right, do I finish college and commission as an officer, or do I just go now, enlist, finish college on the back end? And luckily my dad was an enlisted Green Beret, and he was like, you don't want to be an officer, man. Like, regardless of finishing college, you're going to get 2 years on a team, because for us, our officers, we're an NCO driven organization, and officers only get 2 years as, let's say, door kickers, I guess you could say, and then they're admin for the rest of their career. So he was able to be like, just go enlisted. You can get your degree while you're in, and that's exactly what I did. So I actually finished my bachelor's degree while I was in SF, actively deploying to Afghanistan and all the different places. And then once I retired last or year and a half, 2 years, almost 2 years ago now, um, then I started my master's degree, and I'm about to finish that. So it's taken me 20 years to get there, but we finally made it.
That there's no time like the present to do anything, I say. So that's the way you got to do it. That's the way you got to do it. You talk about being the black sheep. Your sister is an accountant. Your mom is an education administrator. Your dad was not only a Green Beret, but he was also a politician. He was
And
an
a lawyer.
attorney.
Yep.
Um, So
Yeah. And you know,
did
and
they
you
ever
talk.
look at you with just eyes of disappointment when you came
No,
up?
no. I mean, not really. You know, like my family. I'm fortunate. My parents are still married. You know what I mean? Like 40 years later. I was very fortunate in the family that I had and the upbringing that I had. I can't complain there. Like a lot of the but again, like being raised by a Green Beret, you are raised in sort of a strict, disciplined upbringing, right? It's not like I was some nepo baby that could do whatever I wanted. But but no, and yeah, and my sister's not just an accountant. My sister is like um the vice president of a huge accounting firm. But like we were talking, the top echelons of all the career fields and all the ones of all their individual things that they did. And then yeah, I was at that time, I was the baby, and I was, dropping out of school, DJing, joining the military, which obviously everybody was proud of that eventually, but it's not what
Eventually.
it's yeah, it's not what, would have typically been expected for like my type of upbringing with that type of family, right? It's kind of just expected. Everybody goes to college, everybody gets an advanced master's degree, PhD, whatever it is, and you do that. And it just didn't work for me when I was, 20 years old, 21 years old. I couldn't figure out what the hell I wanted to do. And thank God I found the military, because the military gave me everything that I needed as a young man that I was missing, which was, kind of purpose. That was the biggest thing I was missing. I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. I was just floundering, having fun, partying. Military gave me purpose, let me like harness that discipline I sort of already had. And then obviously special forces. So trying to each goal, what's great about the military is like you always have a goal. So for me it was like join the military, okay, special forces assessment and selection, that's the big goal. Like I accomplished that. All right, special forces qualification course, as a young dude who doesn't know what he's doing, that's a big accomplishment. And then you just keep the accomplishments going until yeah, once I graduated and put the Green Beret on, I didn't really feel like a black sheep ever again. I kind of went from black sheep to, I wouldn't say prize child, because again my sister's so successful too, but
I think you have said prize child once or twice before in interviews, but
more of like I finally, I felt like I've reached the same success as the rest of my family at that point.
well, here's the question to that though, is that did you ever, because you seem like a very introspective guy that you take time to kind of look inside at any point
Yeah.
when you're DJing, when you don't know what you're doing in school, you see all the success going on around you with all of your family. Does it ever fuck with your head at all?
Yeah, and that's why I joined the military. So I tell people, I mean, I woke up one morning after, a weekend of DJing and all that, and I literally just I had an internal, I don't know what it was, but I had something internal that told me like, okay, this lifestyle is not enough. And as a 21-year-old kid, 21-year-old man, like when you're talking about having a good time, like I was living the life as a 21-year-old, right? You're the nightclub DJ, hanging out with the hottest cheerleaders. Like everything was great. It wasn't like I was floundering, like looking for some alternative. Just something internal to me said, like, I don't know if it's like I'm destined for something bigger than this, but like acts like living in service is sort of what gives me purpose, whatever that might be. So it was the military for a while. For now, it's like my family, kids. So living in acts of service is what gives me purpose. And I think that's what I was missing. While, I'm not a big guy of like fun driving my decisions. I don't really care about that. And so I think that's really what it was. Like you mentioned, it was just something internal. One day I just woke up and said, I'm going to do something great with my life. And walked into the recruiter's office like 2 days later, signed it on the dotted line for a 6-year contract, and away I went.
Did you go with your dad? Did you go with anybody, or did you
Oh
just
yeah.
tell him?
No. My dad was there every step of the way, because my dad knew all the process to get me in the,
Right.
the right contract. The recruiters couldn't fuck with me. Um, so no, he was with me every step of the way on making sure that I was getting the right things I was supposed to have, which was a huge benefit, obviously, when you're making that decision.
Because he was Vietnam era, and that was, if I'm correct, that was when they introduced kind of the 18 X-ray program, was when it kind of got first prototyped and launched, was during that time period. When he looked at it, had much changed?
Well, he basically was one himself. So my dad went to basic training. It was a little bit different because he volunteered for the 18 X-ray program. It was, I don't remember what it was called at the time, while he was in basic training. That's the way where they were doing it then, was grabbing sort of candidates to go to SFAS straight from basic. So my dad did the same route. He did basic training, airborne school, and then went to Special Forces Assessment and Selection, and his whole career was in SF as well. So that's kind of how, again, he um, knew, and still obviously integrated in the Special Forces community, and he knew obviously what I needed to do for a contract. So that's how I ended up making that decision.
Well, and back then it was like a kind of like a 3-tiered choice. Like you could go in, I've talked to like Stryker Meyer and Dynamite Dick Thompson and the Mac VSOG guys of the era. And, they were like, yeah, you go to basic and then you volunteer to go Green Beret and then you get over to Vietnam and they're like, hey, we got something else, but you got to sign all this stuff. You don't say anything to
exactly
anybody.
what they did. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the really crazy part to me, was because they bring them in and you're talking green behind the ears when they bring them in. And those guys are running some of the craziest missions that ever happened during the Vietnam War.
Yeah, so obviously, my dad's got some very close friends that were in Mac VSOG who I've known forever as well. And yeah, one of actually two of them were, I think, E3s when they were in Mac VSOG. So they were private first classes when they were running operations in Mac VSOG. So yeah, it was a little bit different time, and that's exactly how they explained it. Was like they got out of the Q course, they got to Vietnam, and they got asked like, "Hey, do you guys want to do something special? If you do, come over here into this room and we can talk about it." So yeah, it's pretty wild.
And then sign all this stuff and never talk about it again for the next 25 years.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm glad that time period is over and that these guys' stories are being told, because there's such amazing stories to hear. Just the grit and determination that was going on, not just with the Mac VSOG guys, but, with Green Berets that were over in Vietnam, regular Army that was over in Vietnam. When you, and let's go back, let's digress a little more and even talk about your grandfather, who's 82nd, that is in Normandy.
Yeah, he jumped into Normandy on D-Day.
Right. I mean, that's a lot to live up to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you think?
Yeah.
But it's also very cool, right? Like we joke about, grandfather's no longer with us, obviously, but he was in the 82nd, and the 82nd pre-World War II, they trained out at Camp McCall in North Carolina. That's where they did all their training. And then my dad, obviously Green Beret in the A camps, trained out at Camp McCall. That's where he did the Q course. And then me, Global War and Terror, trained out at Camp McCall. So it was kind of cool, like when I'm out there realizing like, oh shit, my grandpa used to like train in these same woods, and my dad used to train in these same woods doing the same thing that I'm doing now 2 generations later. So, but yeah, I mean, big shoes to fill, but also it pushes you too, right? It's also one of those things that it was probably the biggest advantage. I say this all the time. The biggest advantage I had over other people, or just people in general going through the Special Forces qualification course, was sort of that lineage. Dad's a Green Beret, grandpa jumped into Normandy, because it basically made it so there was no way I could quit. Internally, it took away any ability for me to quit. Why? Because then I'd have to live with the rest of my life. One, go tell dad that I quit trying to be a Green Beret, that he successfully did. And then also, that lineage of sort of high echelons of I don't know, higher level unit in the military. I was the only one that didn't live up to that, right? So I had that in my back pocket the entire way, which was a huge benefit when you're in the shittiest times, when all those times where you're thinking about like, maybe I should just throw in the towel. I always had that in my back pocket to sort of, give me a boost when I needed it.
Well, and if you look at it, here's another interesting part of that too. You look at what you're doing now. You were Green Beret, Global War on Terror, and you have this podcast and you have this ability to tell these tales, to go after, like I said, right or wrong, talk about all of it. I know your grandfather barely talked about it because those guys just didn't talk about it. I know that your dad probably didn't talk about it a lot. And so to take that and flip that coin over, and you have all this exposure, you have all this stuff to get out there. First, what are their thoughts on it? And then I want to kind of compare your thoughts to theirs.
So I've said this before. The first story my dad ever told me about Vietnam, the first, was after I had graduated the Special Forces qualification course, and I was moving back from Fort Bragg, and then I was going to be stationed in Washington State in first group, and my dad helped me move everything. We drove back together, and I remember asking him, like, "Okay, Dad, I'm a literally a Green Beret now. Like, I think you should tell me some stories from your time in the A camps in Vietnam." And then he did, and it was a great, told me a bunch of stories at that point. But to your point, like, never ever talked about, here and there a little bit about military service, but like no combat stories, no nothing about the jungle or anything like that until, I was already graduated in Green Beret myself. So yeah, it's different. And then for me, it's interesting. I think it's just it's changing of the times, right? It's 2025, social media, everybody's on it. My dad's a huge supporter. And so are, pretty much all my teammates, all my friends. It is what it is. It is weird, right? Because I also, when you talk about being a quiet professional, everybody's always like, you should be a quiet professional. I'm like, I did over a decade where I didn't have any social media at all while I was active. Okay. So when you talk about being a quiet professional, that's what I did for a whole career. And now that I'm out and I'm a veteran, it's like, I'll do whatever I want. If I want to talk about my experience and it helps the next generation, then that's good enough for me.
You think it helps you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it gives me purpose. It gives me, um, it lets me, it's not the only thing I'm doing, right? Like I also run my own in-person firearms instructor business, tactical training, a bunch of different stuff, but it's a part of that, right? It's kind of like the marketing side of that in a way. And yeah, it's like I'm one of those people where is if I have to be busy. I have to always be working. If I stop working, the PTSD comes out. I start circling the drain, substance abuse, like all that stuff starts to creep back in like it does for a lot of guys who've been, where I've been. So staying active, staying busy, and also it's kind of therapeutic. I went through a lot of behavioral health while I was in, and part of that was prolonged exposure, which is a type of therapy where you just relive the worst parts of your career over and over and over again. And I know a lot of guys like me that are able to do that on these platforms. It's kind of the same thing, right? Where um, you're able to actually like say it out loud, so you're not just internalizing it. So you do get some benefit out of that as well.
I think it's almost video journaling. I really do. Sometimes you get stuck in that rut where you're telling the same story over and over again, but I still think that it lets you talk about that story. It lets you, because obviously, if you're talking about it, it was an important thing to you. If you're bringing it up, not the person asking you questions, if you're talking about it, there is one story that I want to ask you about, because we're going to get into the good and the bad sides. But you were married during the assessment,
Yeah,
correct?
I was married before I joined the military. I
Okay.
got married young. Yeah.
So but while you're going through the assessment, you're married. You get through assessment and you go home and your house is empty.
No, worse phase than that. SEER school. So
Oh,
I get out of the prisoner of war camps, and I haven't slept in 96 hours and haven't eaten in 9 days. And then I get on the bus and get home, and yeah, my house is empty and my dog's gone. And I'm basically like, what the fuck happened? At the time I should have known, right? Like it wasn't like this, it was one of those things where that it was gonna end, right? Like
right.
my ex-wife, she was young, right? She didn't sign up for, because you got to keep in mind, my ex-wife went from me being a nightclub DJ and all the fun and all the partying and all that to all of a sudden we're in Fort Bragg and I'm gone for 2-3 months at a time in the Special Forces qualification course over and over and over again. So not a it wasn't like one of those crazy like divorce stories you hear and like all the drama. Super amicable. We did no contest, went our separate ways, stayed friends, no harm, no foul. But yes, when you get out of basically being, tortured and starved and sleep deprived for a week, and then you show up to your house empty and your dog gone. Yeah, that fucked me up pretty bad. Sorry if I shouldn't cuss on here.
No, you
Um,
absolutely can. What hurt the most? Was it the dog?
Oh, probably. Yeah. Looking back on it, I remember. Well, but the thing is, it's not like,
I see that you've mentioned the dog 3 times in the
yeah,
story.
yeah.
So
I'm a big animal guy, right? Obviously, like my Munchkin cat is one of the big premier parts of the channel. But and it wasn't like she stole the dog. It was like the dog would have died if she would have left it there in the house, right?
of
Like,
course,
obviously had to take it. But yeah, that was rough. That was a rough point in my life. And like I say, I got done with SEER school on a Friday, and I had to start MOS school on a Monday. So it's just like, and there's no like 2 days, and it's like, all right, I got to figure my life out. What's going on? Nope, I got to start the next phase on Monday. Go. And there's no like, hey, instructors, like I got these personal issues because I maybe wait 4 months. They'd be like, nah, you can figure that out over in the 82nd, right? Like that's how these things work. So I had to just deal with it, and it actually, and I don't want to dredge on about it, but it was probably like the most important moment in my adult life, because what it did is it spiraled me into like insane amounts of like toxicity, because I was going through so much like sort of emotional trauma from everything. I start MOS course, and I'm just a dick to everyone around me. I'm just miserable to be around. And that was the only phase that I ended up recycling. And I recycled due to peer evaluations, because I had a bunch of peers that were basically like, this guy fucking sucks. He's a dickhead. He's rude to everybody. And when the instructors, they didn't kick me out, I just got recycled. But luckily, one of the instructors was like, hey, you're going to read all of your peer evaluations. I'm going to show you everything every single one of your peers said about you. And reading those peer evaluations changed my entire approach to life from that day forward. I have gone above and beyond to always try to be a good teammate, team player, be respectful, treat people well, no matter who they are. If I get mad at people, I usually just go radio silent. I don't lash out. Like I learned so much from that event that at the time it was felt like the end of the world, but looking back on it, it was like kind of one of those transition points for me to become a grown man. So thank God it happened, because had it not, I would have taken a lot longer to sort of mature, I guess I would say.
do you think a part of that, of you being a dickhead, was that you hated the MOS that you were in?
No, no, no. I mean, I didn't. I was an 18 Echo communications sergeant. Everybody's always thought I was an 18 Bravo. They're like the giant tattooed fucking angry looking dude. Even guys in my company that I was working with that were on sister teams. There was a guy one time I'd known for like 4 years, and we were like smoking outside or doing something, and we got to talking, and I was like, I got to do something with the radios, and he was like, "You're an 18 Echo," and I was like, "Yeah, man." He goes, "Oh shit, I thought you were
Fucking
an 18
nerd.
Bravo." He's like, I've known him for 4 years. He's like, "I thought you were an 18 Bravo," but no. I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of being an 18 Echo. It was what it was. Luckily, with Special Forces, like your MOS is very like tertiary in your duties. So for an 18 Echo, like you're getting the radios ready, you're getting them set up. You're going to be a primary communicator out on objective, but your job is being an operator. Every single Green Beret's job is operator first, secondary MOS later. And we're all cross trained in everybody else's jobs anyway. So, I teach high level trauma medicine right now, and I wasn't an 18 Delta, but I was trained by 18 Deltas for 10 years. So that's kind of a cool thing about Green Berets is you can do every MOS's job once you've been on a team for 4 or 5 years.
Why was it so important to get back to the Pacific Northwest?
I mean, that's where I'm from. And then, well, at the time it wasn't, but interesting with the way things work out. I hadn't thought about this fucking since the Q course, but interesting way it worked is that I had Russian as a language, and I was going to go to 10th group. And when I recycled the 18 Echo course, it put me in a new class group. And I didn't want to go to 10th group. I wanted to go to first group because I'm from Oregon. Also my family's from Seattle down to Portland. That's where my entire family is. So that was the main reason I wanted to come to first group, be at home, and all my friends obviously too. But I was supposed to go to 10th and speak Russian, and that recycle was actually what put me in a new peer group, which then recycled my language, and they gave me Chinese Mandarin. And first group, random happen chance luck, and that's how I actually ended up at first group.
Chinese Mandarin?
Yeah,
Holy shit.
Zhongguoren.
That
Yep.
I've heard you say before in a couple of interviews that people maybe underestimate how smart you are.
Yeah, probably.
Well,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
here's the
But
thing.
Yeah.
That point right there, Chinese Mandarin. That's not simple to learn.
Well, and I got it because my GT score is so high. I had like 128 or 129 GT score, which is obviously very, very high for intellect scores. My ASVAB was in the mid to high 90s. Yeah, I think I try to play it off as kind of the dumb tattooed grunt, but yeah, I definitely again, like I said, I was salutatorian at my high school. So I'm not dumb by any means, even if I look like it. But I always tried to like, not try to act pompous or anything like that. I just consider myself a critical thinker. And so I think, like you mentioned earlier, kind of being internal with my thoughts or self-reflective, I do a lot of thinking. Um, so I think that's more of what it is than, I don't know if I'm necessarily that smart. I think I just put more effort into thinking than some people do.
Well, to tag on to that a little more, every episode that you do, I see that you have piles of notes, which I agree. I do the same thing for this.
Yeah.
You got to do your research. You got to do this and that.
We got them right here.
Right there. Yeah. And that's the whole thing though, is when you approach life that way, do you journal a lot?
I wouldn't say I journal. But I am a big notepad guy. I guess that's kind of the same thing, right? Where I like ideas. So I have like pages and pages and pages of ideas for videos or ideas for content or things I might want to do or things that might be interesting. So yeah, I do actually do quite a bit of not so much journaling as like a diary, writing down,
Right.
my thoughts or like what I've been through or things like that. But as for um, trying to keep track of what I'm doing, then yeah, I do actually spend a lot of time, writing or note keeping, I guess you could call it.
I do want to ask though, at one point you gave up tobacco.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Still, we're good.
Okay. So I kind of want to understand that one because of all the things you could give up, you've talked about when you talk about the dark side of special forces, you talk about the alcohol, the pills, the pain medicines, all that kind of stuff. So of all those things, it seems odd to me that you would drop that one and attack it so aggressively. Like you made videos about it, you talked about it, you bring it up a lot. I guess I'm just trying to understand why that.
So my grandpa died from a heart attack. He he was out. He was a hunting. He was also once he retired, he became the hunting and fishing editor for the local paper. So he was huge in the hunting scene here in Oregon. And he died basically hauling a elk, I believe, back to his car. Got in his car, drove home, stepped out of the car, had a heart attack, hit his head on the concrete, out. My dad had quadruple bypass from a heart attack when I was in high school. He smoked. My grandpa smoked. He smoked. So I've known, and my dad's dealing with heart issues right now. But he quit smoking about 20 years ago too. But I've always known I have the genetic propensity to heart disease and heart attack. And I've been using tobacco since, not high school, but basically as soon as I, got into college, I started smoking. And then I started dipping when I was in the military. And at one point I was like 10-year period where I was dipping and like vaping or smoking on top of it, because that's part of the culture too. Like 95% of guys on the teams either dip or smoke. And so I always wanted to quit, but I always felt like I couldn't. So my excuse my entire military career for over a decade was, I will quit the day I retired. That's what I kept telling myself, right? That was my excuse to not quit for forever. And then the retirement day came, and the way I looked at it, I was like, look, I've practiced hardcore discipline in so many different ways in my life. This is just another test. So I used it as like a test for myself to see how disciplined I really was. Could I just literally quit cold turkey the day I retired and never touch cigarettes or dip again? And I did it. And I just did it cold turkey, and that was it. And thank God I did. I'm so glad I did now, almost 2 years later. I haven't touched the stuff. And I'm just so much healthier as well, not smoking and dipping all the time. But yeah, it was more really just kind of like I made an agreement with myself, 10 years ago that I was going to do this once I retired. And once it came to it, it was like, I have to honor this agreement with myself, right? Because it's so easy to just make more excuses for yourself like I did for so long, but that's how I ended up doing it.
Any alternatives that you did that helped out?
Oh yeah, we got them right here. So unfortunately, we got, let's see, these are the Alpha Brains. So I use, they're not Zyns nicotine, but they're caffeine pouches. So
Oh, that's good. So you ought to sleep well.
yeah. So I separate, I transition nicotine for caffeine, but it's better, it's better than smoking cigarettes and stuff like that. But
100%. And there's a lot of those things. And that's why I was asking kind of the alternatives, because there's so many things out there now that are just different ones that are like cinnamon and all different kinds of things that you can use instead of that dip. And it seems to, because I dipped when I was in the military, I dipped a little in my law enforcement career, but I got to a point where like my lip always hurt and all that. And I was like, I got to stop doing this shit.
I forgot that was a big one for the dip. So if like, I'll show you my teeth, like you can see,
Mm-hmm.
my gums are all the way down here. So I didn't really care when it was my lower gums because you can't see them. But actually, like kind of like maybe 6 months before I retired, it started happening on my top teeth, where when I smile, you could start to see it. And that was like an oh shit moment for me of like, oh man, like I actually am starting to get like the teeth problems from it that like people can visibly see. And that was like, oh, that's not great.
I want to start to talk about your career a little. And I've heard you say before that you never joke about combat. You never laugh about the things that you did. And I've heard you say over and over that you did horrible things to people and the job did horrible things to people.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that 21-year-old DJ to the guy that goes through the Q course, recycles, learns about himself, and then touches down in a foreign country to do bad deeds.
Mhm.
How much had you changed by then? And then once you touch down on the ground, what's your thoughts, feelings? Do you think you're a different person? I just want to kind of feel what you did when you got there.
Well, from transitioning from before I was in the military to the time I was in combat, I mean, I was not the same person at all. Like that was you have so much growth through the Special Forces qualification course. I mean, it's a test of grit and a fortitude and discipline, but it also will turn you into a man. Like there is not little boys going through that, making it through that course. Like you become a man in a lot of ways making it through that course, just the way you're tested, the things you have to do, also interacting with people, maturity, emotional maturity, all those things are requirements. So by the time I finished the qualification course, got to a team, went through all the pre-mission trainings, all that different stuff, been on an ODA because I deployed to the Philippines with my team before my first combat deployment. So I think I was, a year and a half into being on the teams by the time I was going to combat. So yeah, I mean, I was 3-4 years into the military um, when I touched down in Afghanistan. So yeah, I was definitely a different person. I couldn't even. And the funniest thing, sometimes I'll see Facebook posts that are like, you get those ones from like 15 years ago, and I'll see them, and I'll be like, "There's no way that's me. I would never write that." So you, completely different person. But as for my approach to combat, now that's not true that I don't ever joke about combat. There is a lot of funny stuff that happens in combat, just if dark humor wise, right? But what I don't do and I don't like, and I'm very adamant about, I considered myself a professional soldier. And what I hate more than anything is when I see special operations veterans, and I've got a compilation of all of the guys I see that say it. Every time I see them say this, I record you in my phone, and I'll do an episode eventually where I have everybody paneled out who said this type of stuff, which is I joined the military to go kill people. I joined special forces because I wanted to go kill people. That is so immature, and it's so like emotionally immature to me that maybe some guys feel that way, and that's fine, but that is not what the special operator job is. Special operators are professional soldiers, problem solvers that are going out and carrying out extremely complex, um, missions and things like that on behalf of the nation for strategic level goals. Okay, not grunt E3, put me where I need to go and kick the door and go. Nothing wrong with that, but that is not what a special operator, his mentality should be. So that's why I'm so critical of that when I see it, because I don't want the next generation that's watching YouTube and seeing their favorite YouTuber to see that and be like, yeah, that's badass. That's cool. I just want to go kill people. Like, to me, I'm sorry. I think there's something wrong in your brain if that is literally what you really wanted to go do. You wanted to go end human life. You didn't care what it was about. You didn't care the purpose it was for. You just wanted to get that out of your system. I don't know, man. I don't like that representation personally.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate about it for a minute, okay? You hear a lot of guys say that they joined and they went to special operations because they wanted to get revenge on what had happened on 9/11, what had happened to troops, and I think that sets it in a different class, one. And
Yeah,
number two, do you think a lot of that, because I can speak to it from the law enforcement perspective, is bravado and people talking? That's all
of
it
course.
is putting up their peacock feathers. And
Of course. There is very few guys, and I mean, look, I mean, I've ended human life myself, right? It is what it is. More than one from point blank range, right? And so have all my teammates and most guys I know. And you get back in the team room and there's high fives and everybody's like, oh, badass, this that. But there's very few guys, if you talk to one on one offline, that are like, did you actually enjoy taking that person's life when you walked over the top of them to do your BDA and saw their dead body? Did you really get off to that? Is that something that like you went home later and you're like, man, that was fucking sweet? I don't think so. Like, now I personally, I don't have any regrets to any of it. It doesn't keep me up at night. Which I know people are going to be like, wait, you just said that, but then you're also saying you don't have any problems with what you did. No, I don't, because I went there on behalf of the United States and I carried out missions I was told to carry out. And unfortunately, the people that, we killed were trying to kill us. And so that's kind of the way I look at it, is those are kill or be killed situations, but that doesn't mean it needs to be glorified. It's a necessity in a lot of times, in a lot of ways. And a lot of what we do, it does make America a better place and a safer place. And that's just kind of, it is what it is, right? But I think all of us are sort of sociopaths where we're able to go out, do that, do the job, compartmentalize it, not have it really affect us that much, come home, be good fathers, good husbands, integrate back into society. When you get on the other, to the far end of that, you get into the psychopath realm where it's like dudes are just, they would be serial killers if they could, but now they have an avenue to go out there. And those are the guys you see are typically the ones getting popped for war crimes and doing crazy shit to detainees. And there is that, right? There is that side of things. There are guys that are doing that. And a lot of those guys are badass warfighters, but they're also a little bit lost in the head as well. So I just think, again, um, what's the legacy we're trying to leave to the next generation? Because I don't hear any of the Vietnam era Green Berets say that. Never heard a single one of my dad's buddies brag about killing Vietnamese and how awesome it was and how they loved doing it. So, that's just a personal feeling. It's my perspective. A lot of people disagree with that, and that's fine, but that's how I feel about it.
so let's take it to another step then. Not necessarily saying they love to kill, but as we all know, you've done some talks about it. The guys that are out there just making up bullshit. Just
There's a lot of that.
well, and the guys that are out there that have a cool enough story on its own, but got to take it to that next level. I got to get your thoughts on that.
It's hard for me because I'm a guy that's got crazy awesome stories and I never talk about them. The only time I ever talk about my combat stories are on other people's podcasts. If you can go actually watch my channel, what you'll see is Nate never talks about his own stories. I'll talk about my career and how my perspective is sort of, maybe shaped on things based off of my experience and my knowledge. But like, I don't tell war stories. I'm not telling combat stories. The biggest reason for that, I tell people, is that I don't want to get anything wrong out of respect from my teammates that were a part of that. And so some of these guys who have not only, not told the truth, but also basically stolen the stories of people that they've served with to profit off of, I don't personally understand it. And there is a lot of it. But yeah, it's hard for me to wrap my head around because I'm just not I'm not a glory chaser for my war efforts type of guy. I didn't when I got into the social media space, I didn't want it to be my whole shtick, my whole persona was my war stories, because that's what a lot of the older soft influencers, their entire brand is their war stories. And that's not what I wanted mine to be. I wanted mine to be my knowledge, my perspective, being entertaining, educational, whatever you like about me, not just like, oh, here goes Nate telling XYZ story that he's told 100 times. So no knock on doing it, but that's just personally why I don't do it that often.
Perfect world, you're in charge. What happens to those people?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of them right now. When we talk about Tim Kennedy is obviously the big one in the Green Beret space. I don't know. I think there's levels to it, right? There's exaggerating on a story that you were actually on, and the fish is bigger, and then there's just straight up lying about having awards you don't have, Valor awards, Purple Hearts, stuff like that. I think, again, when we talk about levels, when you get into those echelons where you're writing books and making millions of dollars off of fake stories that you're telling the public is a true story, to me, I think there should be severe punishments for that. You should lose your beret. You should lose your tab at minimum. You should lose your trident if you're a SEAL. Um, and I mean, it's stolen valor, right? When you're talking about a guy like Tim Kennedy, it's not just that he made up these stories and he lied about having Valor Awards and Purple Hearts and all this stuff. He made tens of millions of dollars off the back of those lies. That's what stolen valor actually is. It's financially benefiting from lying about your service. And so, to me, I think it's infinitely worse for a guy like Tim Kennedy or Britt Slabinski or name whatever other liar we have in the space right now. It's way worse than the homeless guy wearing an Army PT shirt on the corner that's getting exposed for stolen valor, because the sort of expectations and the responsibility is infinitely higher for a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret to actually carry out their lives with integrity. Because for those of you who don't know, the first the first core value of Army Special Forces and most every other special operations unit is integrity. That's always number one. And so when you're talking about lying and grifting, there's no integrity involved in that. So I don't know what you can do about it, but I think just like letting them get away with it is also not the right answer, because then people just continue to do it.
Would you say, though, when people see when you talk about it, because I'm sure that it strikes a special chord with you, especially when Green Berets do it, because you earn that. But you hear people that put in your comment section. I don't know if you look at your comment section or if you ever.
Oh, yeah, I do.
But you have people that come into those comment sections. They're like, "Oh, you're just a fucking angry asshole, or you're just jealous of what has happened to him." Right. That's a big one. Is you're just jealous. I don't think that people understand the level that you feel about it, especially with Green Berets and stuff.
Well, when they talk about you're just jealous, well, if you put my military career and my accolades and my awards and my medals next to Tim Kennedy's, like, there's nothing for me to be jealous of. I've accomplished a shit ton of stuff that he hasn't. I have Valor Awards. I have combat awards. I have all the things he lied about. So when people are like, you're jealous of him, it's like, what exactly am I jealous of? The fact that he grifted for a bunch of money? I'm financially well off too. I'm not jealous of that. But yes, also as a Green Beret, again, I'm multi-generational Green Beret, and it means something to me that we honor those who came before us, including my dead teammates, that they get honored and we uphold those types of things, Valor Awards, Purple Hearts, for those who paid the price to earn them. And when guys who lie about it to make money off of it, I'm not going to stand for it. But also on my platform, like I'm not just out to get everybody. There's actually very few people that I've actually gone after. When you talk about it, the vast majority of times I'm talking positive things about guys that are good representations of special operator soldiers, far more than I am about somebody like Tim Kennedy stealing valor. I mean, I've gone after Tim Kennedy, Britt Slabinski. That's it. I might criticize some things people say sometimes. When you're talking about like actually going after somebody, it's been two guys, and it's been those two guys deserve it. So,
well, I'm glad you brought him up again. when you talk about Brit and you're talking with the Medal of Honor Museum just opening up, that there was a pretty grave injustice done. You
Oh
have
yeah.
made sure that you have not let this story die, that you've not let it go into kind of the dark. You've interviewed the family and all different kinds of stuff. Do you ever worry when you're doing that? Because I think we can agree overall the Medal of Honor Museum is a fantastic idea. It
Yep.
honors the stories of the past and stuff. Do you ever worry whenever you're going after stuff like this that it somehow sullies it a little bit, makes it a little dirty, a little grimy?
No, I don't, because Britt Slabinski's on the board of directors of the museum. And if anybody
Okay.
sullied this and made it grimy, it's Britt fucking Slabinski. Not us, not the Chapman family, not John Chapman, not his sister, not his wife. We're not the ones that did that. I didn't make any decisions at the museum. I'm not the one that lied about John Chapman leaving John Chapman behind. I'm not the one who tried to destroy John Chapman's ability to get a Medal of Honor. I'm not the one that screwed John Chapman's family over. I didn't do any of those things, but those fuckers did. So no, I don't worry about exposing those guys, right? And again, we're talking about guys who are in charge of that museum, who are
100%.
using it as a way to self-promote. Do you know where Britt Sabinski's exhibit is in that museum? Have you heard? It's right next to Audie Murphy and Roy Benavides.
Oh, wow.
So think
That's
about that for a
location,
second.
location, location.
So basically what they said is he's the third of the top 3 most impressive Medal of Honor war heroes that the American military has. That's the way the museum set that up. So no, I don't have any patience for a guy like Britt Sabinski, who's still alive, who basically disrespected the guy who saved his life. John Chapman saved his life, and you shit on him for 20 years and his family, and then you're doing it again with the museum. I don't have any patience for it, and I wish more people would get involved in it.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because that was the next thing I was going to say. With all of this that you're doing, which is very well deserved, especially your interview with Chapman's sister, and you could really tell the raw emotion behind her
Yeah.
talking about this. Um, when you talk about that, but what I always see when this happens is you make very valid points. We expose stuff that's seen out there. People know that it happened. People know that it's not true, and then nothing happens.
Well, I
Nothing
wouldn't say that.
changes.
I wouldn't say that. Let's look at Tim Kennedy for a second, right?
Okay.
Tim Kennedy, I don't know if you followed it, but Tim Kennedy basically is absolutely persona non grata in the veteran community, the firearms community. Staccato came out, massive public apology for
The
having him
commercial.
in a video.
Mm-hmm.
USCCA comes out and says, we apologize. We have nothing to do with him. Bunch of other companies come out, drop him. Black Rifle Coffee Company drops him. All of these people drop him and say, we want nothing to do with you at this point. You go look at his YouTube channel. Look at his videos. He's getting 3,000 to 4,000 views a video on a dude that used to have a massive platform. So, yes, he's still going to linger around. But when you want to talk about nothing happens, I bet you if you ask him, did nothing happen to me? He would say, you destroyed 90% of my financial income, and now I can't go to SHOT Show. I can't, like, my Instagram page, look at anything he posts. It's automatically 50 grenades this, sniper tower this, shy tack this. And I didn't want that for him. Again, I actually was one of Tim Kennedy's biggest supporters before all this happened. That's a long story in itself. I talked about it on the Anti-Hero podcast. I don't want any of this to happen. I don't want this to happen to a Green Beret, but it did. My point being is the Green Beret community came out in droves. That's what's different about our community. We will expose our own bad apples. And it was hundreds of Green Berets who jumped in on board across different metrics, including his own teammates. His own teammates came on the Anti-Hero podcast, right? From the missions in the book.
I had
Whereas
Travis on the show.
there you go. Whereas
Yeah.
the SEAL community is a little bit different. If you've noticed, there's other than a few, very few SEALs who are coming out to try to expose their bad apples. There's a complicated spider web of why that is. And actually, putting out an interview with one of the only eyewitnesses to John Chapman's actions and Britt Sabinski's actions, just interviewed him today. That episode's going out on my channel tomorrow, and you guys will be able to see where you're going to learn a lot about the people that are in charge at the very top. So you think about 20 years ago when Takugar happens, 2002, the ground force commander, Britt Slabinski, you've got the sort of regional commander, SOTF commander, whatever you want to call it, basically the higher level officer who's in charge of directing that unit in, Tim Szymanski, all the usual players that 20 years later, these guys are still in, some of them. And where do you think they are? They're at the top levels of JSOC. They're JSOC commanders. They're SOCOM commanders. So if you're a Navy SEAL who wants to come out and tell a story or wants to come out and expose something, guess what? The people at the top levels of the Department of Defense are ready to burn you alive. They're ready to ruin your career. They're ready to denounce your name, do everything to you. So it's a mafia up top. And that's part of why the SEALs don't expose their own. Whereas an SF, if you're a bad apple, like we'll be the ones to out you. So that's part of the problem too with the museum is not enough Navy SEALs have stepped up or eyewitnesses. Thank God we have one now. But we need some DevGru eyewitnesses to step up and say, look, I was there on the ground. This is what happened. And it's John Chapman is the hero and he deserves to be honored. Until we see that, I think I agree on this side of things. I think it's howling in the wind because I think they're too high up and they're integrated in too many things. And they're on the boards of not just the museum, but of companies and all kinds of different stuff. So,
but that, and that happens in the law enforcement community too. The higher up you go at the end of your career, you're going to go over to a corporate level security position. You're going to, and that's the way it works. I don't know that there's really anything that we can change about that. But I think it brings up another interesting point that you have talked about on your show. And you've talked about the Cybertruck incident in Las Vegas.
Mhm.
And you said that that it's not surprising that this is happening, that this kind of stuff is going on now. And I think that's the exact 180 from what we're just talking about. People that are trying to gain something from their service and stuff, and then you have these things happening. Where is the disconnect happening? Is it the 20 years of sustained combat? Is it the not taking care of who took care of us? Like you just talked about, the guy that saved your life, you're shitting on him now. What is it that's putting us in this situation? This episode is brought to you by Trident Coffee, the veteran-owned brand where every sip inspires you to live life full steam ahead. At Trident, they are more than just coffee. They are storytellers. It's crafted by veterans. Their instant cold brew is perfect for those who serve, those who have served, and anyone who values wellness. Featuring natural ingredients like organic mushrooms, adaptogens, and nootropics, it's more than just a morning pick-me-up. It's your new wellness ritual. Enjoy it at home or on the go, wherever your day takes you. Trident Coffee isn't just about great tasting coffee. It's about empowering you to be the healthiest version of yourself because great veterans make great citizens. Try their instant cold brew coffee today and taste the freedom of wellness. Remember, when you choose Trident, you're not just choosing coffee. You're choosing a path of connection through health and wellness. Use promo code DTD15 for 15% off your order.
I think a lot of it's a mixture of TBI and PTSD. Those two things together with substance abuse on top, that's kind of a trifecta of hell when it comes to suicide, domestic violence, things like we saw, domestic terrorists. Thank God we're not seeing more of that. But yeah, I mean, I think I saw something either yesterday that talked about, there's always like 22 a day. That's been the big thing for veteran suicide, that supposedly it's probably close to almost double that now. So the problem is getting exponentially worse at an exponential rate. And I think that's a big part of it is we also have a culture in the military, special operations, I'm sure law enforcement. We have a culture of we are manly men who don't talk about their problems, who don't get help, who try to fix their problems in a bottle or with pills or however they're doing it, don't get the behavioral health therapy they need. And I think, yeah, a 20-year protracted war, but I also just think that that's part of the societal problem that we have right now is guys aren't willing to get the help they need either. And so when you have that concoction of brain damage, PTSD, you start using substances. Every guy I know that's gone down that road, and unfortunately I've had teammates and best friends that have took their own lives recently within the last couple of years. And it's it's a tough pill to swallow, and I don't have the answers, but unfortunately, I think part of the problem is we're not addressing it. We just kind of like, there's a saying 22 a day and, support veterans, this and that, and then that's it. But like the people that are actually suffering, like what is happening for them? What is happening for these guys? It's hard.
Well, let me ask you, what is happening for these guys? You were there.
Well, I mean, again, I took, I made the decision to get help for, not for me, but for my wife and for my kids, because my wife basically after a really kinetic combat deployment in Afghanistan, which again, one of my teammates committed suicide after that deployment, really nasty deployment, kinetically. She told me like, you're a fucking dick. Your temper is zero, right? Like you got to fix your shit. And so that was kind of a wake up call for me to, cut the booze, go get help, a lot of behavioral health therapy, all those things that I needed to do that who knows where I would be otherwise. So, but a lot of guys don't do that. Um, they don't want to get help. They don't want to talk to a therapist. They don't, whatever that route may be. And I don't know how we change. I don't know how we change that culture. In the short term, I wish I had better ideas. We complain about it, but at this point, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, because we've also never had a generation of, I mean, there's guys that I'm teammates with that did 5, 6, 7, 8 combat deployments. I mean,
50
like
months of deployment.
that doesn't even make sense for your brain when you start to think about this. Like, and they tied in, these dudes have been blown up 3, 4 times, right? Like one of my buddies had to have his scalp opened up and it got hit by multiple IEDs and then closed back up and kept serving and kept going back to combat. So we haven't really experienced anything like that. This is kind of new for our generation when you're talking about over a huge period of time, right? Whereas in like World War II, crazy, crazy combat, crazy battles, but World War II only lasted a couple of years. Guys are in and out. Most guys only served for, or only deployed for like a year. Where we have guys that have, got 5, 6, 7 years downrange in the global war on terror.
Okay, so let's approach a couple of these things then, because I really want your thoughts on them. When you talk about the dark side of special forces, the first thing you bring up is significant damage to the family. That was your number one thing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about a couple things. Here's what's interesting to me about it. When you talk about World War II and you bring that up and you say the guys were only deployed for like a year, they were in, they were out, there was crazy things that happened, but they got back to their families and everything. When you get back from 4 deployments, 5 deployments, 6 deployments, whatever it may be, how do you explain it to your family? Because I've said it in law enforcement a lot. You can't explain certain things unless that person has actually seen it. No matter what you say, no matter how you say it, you can't understand it unless you've been there. So I think that's where we start at with this is, how do you explain it to your family to let them know? Because you said your wife came to you and she said, your attitude's a 0, you're a dick, you're this and that. But there's things behind it. I'm not excusing it by any means. I'm not trying to push it to the side, but there are underlying conditions for that.
Yeah. Well, and one of those is I just got done 6 months hunting human beings, right? And then you come transport from it's a different reality. It's not even the same universe. It's not the same. Like you just mentioned, people that, and law enforcement, some of the things you see, people don't understand that it's not the same reality as someone who's just living their life in good old fashioned America, going about their day, going to college. Like, war is not the same. It's a completely different reality. And so when you are there and then all of a sudden you get picked up and you get dumped right back into regular society and regular reality, but your body just is so accustomed to 6 months of insane high stress and adrenaline rushes and all these different things. And then, yeah, you get pulled out of that. It's pretty hard to just turn that off immediately and just be a normal person again. What I would say is for the family, I've always been one where you asked, how do I explain that to my family? I don't, because I've always felt like it is not their burden to carry. And so I have found ways to address those issues, whether it be, hey, talking with teammates all the time, behavior health, all these different things. I always looked at it as my duty when I talked about living in acts of service. I live in acts of service for my family, for my friends, for everyone else. And so it was a responsibility. It's a responsibility of mine to not offload my trauma on my wife and kids. And I take that seriously. So I put in effort to not do that, which I don't think a lot of guys have quite figured out, that it is your responsibility. You're not a victim. It doesn't matter what you've been through in combat. You cannot dump that on your children. You cannot dump that on your wife, because they don't understand, like you said, and they're not going to. All they understand is the way that you're treating them. And so you have to find ways, whether it be through physical fitness, marathon running, I don't care what it is, journaling. There's 1,000 different options, but I think it's your responsibility as a man to make sure that you're not offloading that trauma on to, the rest of your family.
Can I play devil's advocate with that for just a minute of how you say that?
Sure.
With everything that they have to go through, a law enforcement officer's family's life, a first responder's family's life, special operations, with everything that they give up and everything that they go through, if you don't talk about some of that stuff and you don't talk about how it changed you, don't you think that shortchanges them a little bit on understanding why they gave up the things they did, why they went through all of that?
So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I don't talk to my wife and kids about my service or about my military career, about what we're doing. Of course I do. But I'm talking about the trauma that I've been through. I'm talking about nasty combat. I'm talking about coming up and seeing 1-year-old infants strapped onto adult males' bodies that we just killed, right? That's the type of thing that really fucks your brain up, that I'm not going to offload that onto my wife and kids. That's what I meant by that. But all the good stuff about the career, I'm always sharing that, so that they, like, we're doing military free fall jumps or we're doing dives or whatever we're doing. Of course, you always want to share that. I'm talking about that really serious stuff that they're not going to be able to understand. And again, it's me personally. I've made the decision that, again, they don't need to ask me about that, because I'm not treating them in a way that makes them feel like something is wrong, right? Like that I brought back all that trauma and they can't understand why. So again, for me, that's the way I've handled it. I'm not going to tell anybody else not to do that.
Of course.
But yeah, I just don't think, like, what how am I going to explain that to my wife and kids? Like, what those things, like, so, and police officers, I know you guys, you deal with the same stuff. Like, you see some of the worst of humanity on a daily basis. Do you want to come home and dump that on your wife and kids? I don't know. I mean, it's not for me, but everybody needs to do what they need to do. If you have a wife that's supportive and can handle that, hey, cool. But again, for me personally, that's just not how I handle it.
Yeah, I have been extremely blessed. My wife was an ER nurse for 20 years. So, I mean,
there you go. Yep.
She saw the same clients just for a different thing.
Right.
So I was very fortunate and blessed in that situation that I could explain, like, this is why this happened and stuff. But yeah, you're right. I always wonder, though, when I talk to guys and I talk to law enforcement, because I do another show where it's just undercovers, where we talk about their life of being an undercover and having to be 3 different kinds of people. You got to be a cop because you got to be professional. You got to be an undercover and you got to be a shithead to fit in with shitheads. And then you got to come home and you got to be a family man. And how do you bounce between those 3 lives 24 hours a day, 365 days a year? How do you continue without hurting your mental health? How do you continue to transition between all of them back and forth? I've had guys tell me that it was easier. I've had guys tell me that became who they were. That person was who they were 24 hours a day. Yeah. And so I always wonder when I talk to guys like you and other people, when we talk about the bad things, like you just said, like the 1-year-old strapped to, that's one of the worst things that you could see in your entire life. I mean, you can't even fathom that. You can't write that stuff down and make it up for a movie. And I just wonder how long that lingers, because there's stuff about my career that I can remember to this day exactly what it was, standing there looking at it, all of those kind of things. I remember the first murder that I went to. I remember all of that kind of stuff. I wonder how long that sticks around and how we compartmentalize it enough to make it okay that it never comes back full force.
So, like I said, that's what I did was a type of behavioral health called prolonged exposure. And it wasn't about compartmentalizing it. It was about uncompartmentalizing it. And the idea is that your brain, thinking an analogy for it is like a filing cabinet. And when you have trauma, what you're doing is you're just smashing that trauma into the bottom of that filing cabinet, and then you're just dumping papers on top of it. Well, the bottom of that filing cabinet is going to stay messed up. You didn't fix any issue. So the idea is with prolonged exposure, you basically are, it's kind of like not meditation in a way or hypnosis, sort of like that, but you just sit down, close your eyes with a therapist, and you just go like things you see, smell, taste, all those things from the very start of an operation to the very end. And you do it over and over and over. Like you do it once a week, over and over and over again. And I'll tell you, the first time I did it, like one of the really nasty missions that we were on, I was done with the story in like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. 3 months later, it was 30 minutes. And then by the end of it, that was like an hour and a half that I recalled so much that my mind had just buried deep down into that filing cabinet. And to the point where I could barely talk about that stuff when I started to that now I can talk about it freely without anxiety. And so that was a big way for undoing trauma for me that worked. But again, it's different for everybody. Some people are better off just stuffing that in the bottom of filing cabinet, forgetting about it, and never thinking about it again. If you can do that, that's great. But for me, I ended up having extreme anxiety, panic attacks, all sorts while I was, and for no reason. I would randomly just have a panic attack when I would get, and it was always when I would like get home from work. When I would start relaxing, I would get massive anxiety and massive panic attacks. And that's like you start to realize, okay, something's wrong with my brain. I need to fix it. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how I dealt with it, but it's different for everybody. And when you talk about how long you're going to remember those things, I mean, sad to say that, I mentioned my teammate that took his own life a few years ago. That was the teammate that had shot and killed that insurgent, right? So I can't say that that's why he did it, but I can tell you, this heavy weight that a lot of us carry for things that they've seen and done.
So let me ask you a question that I don't think you've ever been asked before. Talking about being able to remember sight, sound, smells. Your last combat operation.
My last one. I definitely remember flying home because I was sitting on the back of a Chinook and the sun was coming up. And I remembered sort of like the weight of that feeling, knowing we were leaving, and that was the last one after a long kinetic 6 months. I'm trying to remember what we did on that last combat operation. I would have to sit down and unpack it and figure out which one was which.
And I,
'Cause
I think
we have
more
so
to the
many of
point of
them,
not necessarily what you did. I would love to hear what you did on it, but I think more to the point, when you're going into that, do you know it's your last combat operation?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Because we're a couple weeks out from redeploying. And so
Okay,
it's like, hey, hey, this is going to be the last one.
right. Here's what I've learned in law enforcement. When you say this one's going to be simple, this one's going to be this, that's the one that's
Oh,
going to turn out to be a motherfucker and you're going to be there forever. Right.
yeah.
I want to kind of get your mind, your thoughts of going into this last mission that this is my last combat mission that I'm going into, this life that I've lived. And I've heard you talk about the adrenaline and the adrenaline dumps and all that kind of stuff. This is the last time you're going to do it. And you know it.
Well, but the thing is that I didn't at the time, right? So that was in late 2018. And not only that, but I was prepped and ready to go on another. There's a different story. My unit was supposed to be the special forces unit that facilitated the withdrawal of Afghanistan. That got botched and called off. But I mean, for us, that wasn't going to be my last combat mission at the time, right? Like this war is going to go on forever, and I'm going to keep redeploying to combat. So that's not really how I looked at it at the time, if that makes sense, right? Because it was a rotating door in the global war on terror, and it's like we'll be back in 18 months, right back to the sand, and we were supposed to be. Obviously, that next deployment got canceled literally last second, And we also happened following that decision. But yeah, at the time, I can't say that it was surreal or anything. Like, I can tell you what was surreal was my last big training event before I retired. That was an insanely surreal feeling because we were in Australia. We were working with the Aussie 2 Commando guys, and I remember we were doing, it was military free fall jumps or something we were doing. I remember like just sitting on a rucksack after our last jump, and I knew like this was the last operational thing that I was ever going to do in special forces. And I remember just watching the sunset and just breaking down and just started just bawling my eyes. I haven't cried in, a decade. And like that moment was so heavy for me of like, this is the end of a decade long career of like, the craziest job you can do. So that was more of a surreal moment for me than anything in leaving combat was.
Okay, so let's take that one a step further. When you leave Australia and you come back and you retire and it's real and you
Yep.
leave post and you go to your house out
Yeah.
in the real world and all that kind of stuff. How's that feel? Because it's scary as shit to know that something you did
Yeah.
has come to an end now.
So I kind of went, the thing is like, because retirement sort of takes a while in the military where you're just like retiring, but you're not really going to work and not really doing anything. I kind of went through that phase while I was still in. So like the super poopy face, depressed, what am I going to do? Trying to figure all that out. I went through that while I still had like three months or so left. Once I was actually like signed on the dotted line and was out, I was actually stoked. Because I'd kind of gotten past all the poopy faced boo boo poor as me mentality, and I was ready to move on. And I had a bunch of different stuff lined up. I had already been accepted to start my master's degree at the University of Oregon, so I already had like lined myself up with a lot of things, which I think is important for everybody who's getting out of like. I know a lot of people like to say like, oh, take some time, just don't do anything, you'll figure it out on the back end. For me, that's not how things work. So like the second I retired, I retired and had, I think I started school down in Oregon like the following week. So it was like bang, I was out and then I was immediately, and I had started my business as well. So I went from like taking the uniform on to as busier than I was in the military immediately, which kind of helped for me. And again, when I talked about that purpose, um, kind of like took away from that kind of like typical, I don't know what I'm going to do, sad type of veteran. But again, I went through it like everybody else did. I just kind of went through it during that retirement phase.
Let's talk about the physical destruction that it does to your body. Because when you get out and you think that you're still
Yeah.
Superman, you find out quickly that you're not. Let's talk about a couple of your injuries if I can go down the list.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Broken left foot, fractured right tibia, torn meniscus, osteoarthritis, torn patella tendon in the left knee, multiple I guess you had multiple knee operations, degenerative disc disease, both shoulders reconstructed,
Yeah, fully
torn
reconstructed.
bicep, a labrum, AC
On
joint,
both
rotator
sides.
cuff, and
Yeah.
oh, by the way, that's not just the right arm, that's the left arm.
Yep.
When you see all of that physical pain and all that physical toll that it did to your body, and then you see at the end, because I really feel, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I really feel like you with the Afghanistan trip, because I've heard you talk about it, where you're supposed to go over there. I feel you think that you got cheated out of the end of your career.
Oh, yeah, we all felt that way. And less for me because I was the second most senior NCO on that ODA when it happened. So I had already had 7.5 years of team time. But for all our young dudes that were, 1-2 years out of the course, they hadn't been to combat, hadn't been to war. They spent 6 to 9 months training up to go finally do this. All right. When you're a young Green Beret, the pinnacle of your career is going to combat, because I know I said earlier that I'm not a guy that glorifies war. I'm not a guy that glorifies killing, but I can tell you this, I loved combat and I loved war. And I know that people can't really understand how I could say both of those things at the same time. But when I'm talking about from a tactical understanding of like the act of combat, not just shooting people, but like when you're going force on force with another enemy force and maneuvering elements and doing all these different things like a chess match. It's a thinking man's game, right? Combat is a thinking man's game. It's very, very addicting. The adrenaline is skyrocket high. So for all these young guys, they all know this is sort of the pinnacle. They're finally going to get their chance, go see combat deployment. And then it got, the rug got pulled from underneath us at the last second. Like, we had our beards grown out. We had shipped our equipment into Afghanistan, which is like, we're leaving the next week. And it was just immediately out of nowhere. Deployments canceled. No Green Berets will be going into Afghanistan. 10th Special Forces Group got pulled out. And it was maybe a month or so later when we saw Bagram fall and all that. So, yeah, when you think about it that way, it's not just like I felt like my career got cheated. It felt like all of my guys that I had been mentoring for 2 years got their careers cheated. And then also America got cheated. 13 service members got cheated out of their lives because we would have had 230 Green Berets in Bagram, and the Taliban would have never even tried to take it. So a lot of people got cheated at the end of that. Me, less than others, because again, I already had a great career. It was sort of the very back portion of my career. But yeah, I mean, it still was one of those things of like, I was excited. We were all ready to go, and didn't
Well, you
pan
say
out,
that,
obviously.
that it wasn't cheating you a lot, but here's what I take from listening to you about it is maybe not necessarily cheated is the right word, but I think that you look at your career and you see what happened there, a month later. And I've heard guys say, I don't not sleep for the things that I did. I don't sleep for the things that I didn't do.
Mm,
And that comes
yeah,
back
those
to
will kill
haunt
you.
them.
Those will kill you. So for me, again, I talk about having a great career, but it also got cut short, unfortunately, due to injuries. I was one of the fastest promoted NCOs that you can really get in our unit. I mean, hit E7 in 7 years, like within the day of 7. I was on poised to be one of the younger master sergeants that they're going to find in group, and which would have made me one of the youngest sergeant majors you would have find in the regiment. But that senior leadership, sergeant major level stuff got cut off, obviously due to the injuries, because I just literally couldn't do the job anymore following a military free fall accident at the very end of my career, which is what blew the both shoulders out to have both of those reconstructed. And that was the point where it was like, okay, I've already had 4 knee surgeries. I get back procedures constantly, Kenalog injections constantly, and now all of a sudden I've had both shoulders got to get reconstructed. That was like, okay, buddy, and I was 37 at the time, and it was like, the body's not recovering quite like it used to. And I'm 10 major invasive surgeries deep, and it's like, at that point it kind of became like, what do I want my quality of life to be 10 years from now, 15 years from now, if I keep burning this thing in, and I'm going to be walking with a cane when I'm 45 and I got kids in middle and high school. That doesn't really seem like a smart idea. So that's really why I had to make the decision to hang it up at that point.
Well, let's talk about that. You mention a lot pain pills and alcohol whenever you have physical injuries, and we'll get into pain pills and alcohol when you have PTS. So that's a motherfucker of a combo. What are you on when you're in and you're getting all these surgeries and you're getting all these
Oh,
operations? What are you taking?
yeah. I mean, for me, like, I'm fortunate in that opiates make me sick. And
Okay,
so I've never been a guy that's like, I'm taking them right after the surgery for the first 2-3 days
of
because you
course.
have to. But I'm not a guy who ever really suffered from an opiate issue, thank God, because again, they made me so sick that it didn't feel good to take opiates for me. Some people are lucky like that. And then booze, I recreationally drink. I still do. I've never had a problem with drinking either. I've really never had a substance abuse problem per se. The drinking was always kind of the worst, right? Like that not that I would drink to get drunk, but it's like at my worst, it's like, I could do a third of a bottle of whiskey a night, get a good buzz on, but like that's going to add up over time. So I try to cut back on a lot of that in general, but I'm also a huge proponent of not taking pharmaceuticals. I've never touched anything for anxiety, for PTSD, for depression. I take the pain pills for the least amount of time possible. I just don't believe in pharmaceuticals as being a problem solver for the most part. They don't help me personally. If they help you, God bless, but I just think they're one of those things that's kind of like covering up symptoms, not fixing the problem. And so I've stayed away from that stuff for the most part, just because I don't personally like it.
So when you say all that, though, it doesn't seem like I'm trying to connect the two, though. When you say that you never really had a problem with alcohol, you never had a problem with the pain pills, but at the end of your career or close to the end of your career, when your wife tells you you're not the same person, I got to understand where that's coming from then, because there's got to
Oh,
be
no,
an
no,
external.
that was way earlier in the career that we had that conversation.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, that was following like a combat deployment. Did that where I kind of figured out like, okay, I got to get my shit fixed and figured out. I spent years in the military with my brain put back together, so it wasn't like I did this all at the end of my career. I went through behavioral health like while I was still serving, um, which helped dramatically. So I've been in a pretty good spot for, quite a few years, even on the back half of my career. That was more of like when I was learning what, coming home from a combat deployment, learning what that even was, you know. And it gets the other thing is it gets easier that like it gets easier the longer you're in and the more you do it. So I know it's like, yes, these compiling things, but when you deploy, you come back from a 6-month deployment. The first time you do it, it's a lot harder. The second time you do it, you're kind of accustomed to it. You know the signs and symptoms. You know what to look out for. The third time you do it, you're like, all right, I know what this is like. I got to get my brain back in order. So yeah, that was more of an early in the career thing with
So let
me
me ask you
figuring
then,
that out.
how many guys figure that out? Is it a huge percentage? Is it a small percentage?
How many of them figure out like?
Are you an outlier where you go, oh, okay, this is my second one. I know this is getting ready. My
So
third one.
I'll look at it kind of like divorce, right? Divorce is super, super prominent in SF, but I think it's very prominent early in guys' careers. I think guys, as they figure it out and are in for a while and also on like second marriages, like I was, right? Like you learned a lot of lessons from the first marriage. They do a lot better because, I mean, on both, I was on 3 different ODAs, but my 2 main ODAs I was on, I think 10 or 11 out of 12 guys on both ODAs were married. And we had on the first ODA something like 30 something kids between the 12 guys. And then on the other ODA, even more than that. So it's actually a lot more guys, I think. It's one of those things again where it's like, yeah, you're gonna get like you could destroy your family and all these things, but it's usually like early in the career that type. Especially the qualification course is really bad for that early in the career. But if you can kind of make it past that point, I think a lot of guys actually do a pretty good job about it. Not everybody, right? There's also a lot of single 40-year-old guys out there who have no relationships with their wife and kids. That's a reality too, right? That are, chasing combat deployments. I'm not saying that's not out there, but I think there's a lot more successful sort of families and guys figuring it out than people really think in the long run.
When you say that, the 40-year-old single guys, what's the story on that one dude that dances all the time in his?
Oh, he's a lieutenant colonel.
You know the story
I don't.
behind that?
Oh, yeah. So apparently he was a lieutenant colonel. I don't know who with or where, and then or at some point in his officer career, he switched and became a chaplain. So he's a Green Beret chaplain who does TikTok dances on TikTok in Latin music. That's his thing. So I don't know. That's I don't know where that guy came from or how anybody's because apparently he's still active duty, which to me is insane because it's like how is anybody in that dude's command? Well, I don't know how high up the command you got to go, being like you because lieutenant colonel, it's hard to get higher than that in most SF organizations. So they're typically there's one Fulberg colonel at each group, so who knows, but yeah, I don't know where the hell that guy came from, but yeah, he's kind of a stain on our community a little bit because I there's nothing I hate worse than watching professional soldiers, police officers, or whatever
I'm,
dancing like fucking idiots on TikTok in uniform, right? If you want to do that shit in your because I don't wear a uniform and do Green Beret content on my channel. Like, why? Because I'm not a representative of the Department of Defense anymore. So and you are representing the Army when you put on your full uniform and your beret and you dance around like an asshole. You are. That's the whole point of the uniform, police officer too. So it's like, dude, I don't know. I hate it from every angle. Do it in your free time. Nothing wrong with that. But like, be professional when you have the uniform on.
What's crazy to me about it is, and like I said, before you even finished that sentence, I knew what you were going to say because I'm in 100% agreement. It's so weird to me the landscape has changed because I'm coming up on, this is my 19th year in law enforcement, and I'm not saying, oh, back in my day or anything like that, but the landscape has changed so much that sometimes that stuff is encouraged. Hey, we want them to know that we're people and stuff. I'm like, that doesn't let them know we're people. We
No.
look like assholes doing it.
Yeah. No, and it's like, why does the public, my job is to protect and serve. Why do they need to see me doing Britney Spears dances on TikTok? How does that correlate to my job of fighting crime or fighting global war on terror? I'm not really sure, but I mean, that's where we're at. And there's a lot more of it than, I think people realize. It's like, you go on TikTok and this is everywhere. I think the Department of Defense needs to just put out a memorandum of like, there will be UCMJ action if you're caught doing anything on TikTok in uniform. No big deal. And then they just can't wear a uniform when they do it. It's an easy fix.
Yeah. I want to get a hot take from you. I want to know what you think about all of this this signal stuff going on right now.
Okay. Oh man. So I talked about it a little bit in a recent video on my comedy video on the Houthis. If you haven't seen it, that video is hilarious. But I mean, let's just be honest. Like, it's a huge fuck up. There's really no way to splice it. I don't really care if you're conservative, you're liberal. Like, the fact that you added, now again, have we figured out for sure?
I don't think we have.
So that's the other thing I'm still waiting to see is I haven't seen what's actually in this signal chat. So if it, let's say hypotheticals, right? Because I don't know for sure. Hypothetically, if it's true and you had all the top level officials of the Department of Defense, like Mike Lee and Tulsi Gabbard, Pete, whoever else was in that chat, and you added a reporter to that chat and you were literally sending actual battle plans for war to that signal chat, that is dumb as fuck. And I am shocked that somebody did something that stupid. So again, I don't know exactly if that's what happened, but if that's literally what happened, then holy shit. I mean, how we have my point is like, we have red side networks. Like, I can call you up on a classified phone or a classified email server. Why the hell am I sending classified documents on the Signal phone? I never did that. I wasn't allowed to do that. We, like, when I had classified information, which we did all the time, right?
And you were a
I wasn't
combo
allowed.
guy.
Yeah, I wasn't allowed to send that on a Signal chat. I would have had my career. If somebody would, and here's the way I like to say it, if somebody would have caught me sending sensitive or red side or classified information via Signal to other teammates, I would have lost my entire career on the spot. My secret
You
clearance
might
would have
have
been
gone
yanked.
to prison.
I probably would have, yes. And so if we're just going to say, hey, no harm, no foul, whoopsies, I don't know. But at the same time, I have no idea what really is going on in that Signal chat. If it's just a group of people that happen to be, high level echelon people in the Department of Defense, but they weren't talking about battle plans for Yemen, then I don't really give a shit. But if they were, yeah, that's dumb. But we'll have to wait and see, I think.
I'll have to send, I think I have some screenshots of supposedly what it was, but I'll send them to you and let you take a look at them. But I think you're exactly right. And that's another thing that has always bothered me in the law enforcement career and a military career is different standards for different areas.
Uh-huh.
Like you just said, if you would have done that, you'd have been finished, probably gone to prison. Now we look at it as, oops, we messed that up, which you can't be oops at that level. You're held, like we talked about before, to a higher standard.
But they're not. And I've got a great story for you if you want to hear about it.
Sure.
About first group commander, full bird colonel. You could Google this one if you want. Made national news when it happened a few years ago. Colonel Owen Ray, who was our group commander, who one night gets shit-faced drunk, which I'm sure he did all the time, is basically beating his wife almost to death, kicking her in the face, and his high school age kids come and try to stop him, which they can't. They call the police. He then pulls a gun out and holds his wife and kids hostage at gunpoint and gets in an armed standoff with Tacoma Police Department outside for a special forces group. You want to know what happened to him from all of that? Could you guess?
Nothing.
Not much. He was basically forced to retire. He kept his retirement, didn't have his beret pulled, didn't have his tab pulled, and basically was just moved on with his life. So when you talk about if an NCO, an E6 or an E7 would have done that same thing, he would be in federal prison 100% of the time. So there is a huge double standard when it comes to about 06 and above, and you move up into that Department of Defense echelon. It should be higher levels of responsibility, but it's definitely not when it comes to accountability.
So why is the disparity there? This
Well,
is just your take on it. Why is the disparity there?
Well, I think because, the further you get up the chain, those are the people in charge. And when your buddies are next to you and they're the ones making the decision of what's going to happen to your career, instead of the 06, let's say if I'm just a regular team guy as an E6, I make this huge mistake. Who's making that decision? Some guy 10 levels up from me. But when it's the group commander who's making that decision, Usasak, who's a bunch of guys he's probably worked with. So it's kind of that good old boys club, right? Where you're not going to necessarily get punished as hard as you probably should. And we'll probably see it with something like this email, with this signal stuff. I've said already, I think that's going to be out of the news cycle in a week. I think they just deny it, ignore it, and it's going to be gone because the news cycle's so crazy that there will be something else that, Donald Trump will say something crazy next week, and then everybody will be focused on that, and then we'll be moved on to something else. But who knows?
Which is a bad place to be in, to me, if we're saying that the news cycle is so crazy that we could get off something relatively very important. So let's talk about when special forces influencers are not role models. It's a big thing that you say, and you've said it a couple times that they're not role models. But I think that's kind of a double-edged sword again, too, because you kind of have to be role models. You're held to a higher standard. So can you explain that statement?
Sure. I think so. The reason why I made that video is because when I first started with Brent, working with Brent on exposing Tim Kennedy, the backlash to that was, I wouldn't say like super severe, but it's crazy how many people were so upset and so mad, and they could not possibly fathom the fact that a Green Beret UFC fighter could have lied about his entire career and lied about Valor Awards and Purple Hearts and all this. They couldn't wrap their brains around it. Part of it is that was their hero, right? So you put these people up on a pedestal, whether it be a special operator, police officer, astronaut, it doesn't matter. My point was this, is that we're all human beings. I'm just a regular guy, just like every other special operator is, that did an extremely sort of impressive job, I guess you could say it, right? But at the end of the day, we all have our faults. And so when you start putting people on pedestals, they're gonna inevitably let you down because you're gonna realize they're human. And my point was this. What do you want your role model to be? When you talk about a double-edged sword, I do agree. There are things about a Green Beret or a Navy SEAL that you could look at them as a role model for. The toughness, the grit, the discipline, all of the things required to become a Green Beret, a Navy SEAL, a Delta Force operator. That is insane. It's an insane thing to accomplish. And so, yes, you could look up to that. However, making me or Brent Tucker or whoever your role model, and then all of a sudden I get a DUI or domestic violence or something like this, and then your whole world crashes down because, again, you put me on this pedestal. That's what I don't think people should do, because this is what I said. From the double-edged sword, there's a lot of amazing things that we do, but there's also a lot of pretty, I don't want to say evil because it's not necessarily evil, but there's a lot of ugly things that we have to go do too, right? War is very, very ugly, and we go do it, and we are incredibly, incredibly good at it. And so when you talk about war, well, I mean, which side are you on? I think America, we're the good guys because I'm pro-America. It is what it is. I don't ever take, and all my content, there's a lot of soft operators out there that take the United States military will get crushed by the cartels or crushed by China or this or that. That's not what I do. I always take America's side. But if if we go downrange and we go to war, in Iraq, we killed 1 million people. Is that a good thing? That's what I say to people. Do you think that's a good thing? I mean, I guess which side you're on. If you were an
I was
Iraqi,
about to say it's a point of perspective.
if you were an Iraqi, you didn't think that was so great, right? And the Americans probably weren't the good guys. So a lot of it is perspective on who's the good guy. But that's kind of my point where, what do you want your role model to be and what for? Is it, you want me to be your role model because I went and conducted war and put people in graves? Is that why you want to be a role model? Or you look at me as a role model? Or could you look at me or someone else in SOF and think you're a role model because of what you've accomplished, right? And the discipline and all these different things. So I think you can look up to people, but I think role models should be someone immediate in your life, a father, some type of mentor, somebody that, you have individually looked at. I have my own, right, with guys I work with that I look up to as role models. And it's not just because of something they have accomplished. It's because of their character and the way they conduct themselves. And it's the way they treat other people. That's what I look at for a role model, not somebody that's just a badass who kicked in doors and was awesome at combat. I just don't think that's what we should be idolizing, I guess.
I live by the motto: you're a villain in someone's story.
100%.
Yeah.
Especially for us.
You might be a hero in a lot of people's story. You're a fucking villain in someone's story.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
All right, let's kind of start wrapping this up. I want to ask you a couple more questions. I want you to compare the generations. We've talked about it a lot tonight. The World War II generation to the Vietnam generation to the GWAT era generation. Similarities, differences, and what you felt that we brought forward that was a good thing to bring forward.
Generation from the generation as a whole, or as like military warfighters generation to generation?
You can do either one.
I don't want to do society because I think society is just cyclical. Like if you go back to the 1900s, you've got the progressive movement, right? Like the progressive movements happened 5 times in the last 100 years, and we go on these cycles back left to right, left to right. But from the military perspective, I actually don't think there's that big of a difference between each generation. Me and my dad talk about this all the time, that there's a common thread that runs through a demographic of man and woman that decides to serve, whether it be the military, law enforcement, firefighters. There's a common thread that runs through everyone. There's so much. If you ever think about, I'm sure you've felt this too, right? Where you just feel more at home with a group of guys from our type of service, whether it be Marine or military, police officers, firemen. I just feel when I'm around those type of people that this is like my type of person. It's the way I have it. And I think that this has probably gone back thousands of years. And I think it's the warrior culture. And it could be a police officer, it could be a military. I think there has just been humans that have been warriors and part of the warrior culture for thousands of years. And in each generation, there is that subset of people. So whatever society is doing, right? It's the hippie movement. It's, oh, now we're on the other side in the 70s and 80s where we're far right, Reaganism, right? And oh, then we're back on progressivism in the early 2000s. The military and the warrior culture has sort of just stayed the same for thousands of years. Whether it's, and you look at Japan, you look at Rome, all these different places. I mean, I read Marcus Aurelius all the time, and I can take wisdom from that directly applies to my life and the things I'm doing when I was in the service. So I think there's far less differences than people think. And part of why I say that is because there's so much shit talked about Gen Z and this future generation. They're weak, right? They have no discipline, emotionally immature. I think as a whole, I think that's pretty fair from a societal generation point. But I know I've seen it. I mean, I only retired a year and a half ago. There was still a ton of absolute savages that were coming out of that generation too. I mean, they're on the teams right now. We have a bunch of Gen Z Green Berets right now. So for me, the more I look at it, I don't think there's that big of a difference in generations between the World War II war fighters, Vietnam war fighters, global war on terror war fighters. When I go to a Special Forces Association meeting and it's all guys from sort of Korean War and Vietnam there, it's no different really. When I'm sitting there hanging out, telling stories, talking, it feels like a group of global war on terror guys as well. So That's my personal feeling on it. I'm not a guy that's like, yeah, the new generation's weak. It's like, maybe. But I also think that they just haven't been called. They haven't been called upon yet to show their worth. So that's where I think we're at.
Do you think you lived up to everything that you put on yourself from your family history throughout your career?
Oh, do I think I lived up to that? No. I I think I had a very successful military career, but there was a ton of stuff that I think I wish I would have still accomplished. I hope that I did. I hope I did the lineage proud. I served. I went and fought in combat. Um, but as for, did I live up to everything? Oh God, no. I couldn't say that about myself. I was never the best at anything. I was, and I think most guys think that when you talk about your careers, like there was always somebody better than me. Um,
I
I think I
heard you
did
were a pretty
pretty
good
well.
diver.
No, I wasn't a good diver at all. I was on a dive team, but I wasn't a good diver. No, I didn't even get to go to
You
CDQC
did what,
because
three pre-dives?
yeah, I was terrible. Right.
Well,
So,
I once again, I
but
think that's all a matter of perspective.
yeah. But my point is like, you don't have to be the best. And, I've heard a guy, Andy Stump, who I'm friends with, I heard him talking the other day about, that dude's in dev group, 10 combat deployments. And he was saying the same thing of like, yeah, I was never the best at anything. I just tried my best and was kind of just average. And that's kind of the way I looked at myself as well, is like, I just did my best. I tried to be a good teammate and tried to always always respect my teammates. And that was the biggest thing for me, especially in combat, was like, I don't want to be a liability to my teammates. I want to be value added to my teammates. And I think I was. So that's about as best as I could say about that.
What do you miss the most?
I say this all the time. Easy question. When I talk about the military, right? I miss being on the teams. I miss the brotherhood. I miss being with the boys. I miss doing high adrenaline things with my best friends. What I don't miss is being in the military. I do not miss putting the uniform on. Not that I disrespect the uniform, but I don't miss having to get permission as a 37-year-old man from a 42-year-old man to go on a 4-day vacation. I don't miss having to shave. I don't miss a lot about the military, but I do miss the job of being a Green Beret.
One thing you could change about your career?
Well, I mean, not medically retiring, because again, I was right about to be a team sergeant and take a team, and becoming a team sergeant is sort of the ultimate pinnacle of your career is an SFNCO. It's kind of like that's what everybody strives to for 7 to 10 years. And I was right there at the doorstep when I had my massive injuries. So that's the thing that I think I don't want to say regret, because I didn't really have a choice. But it's one of the things I wish I would have been able to do.
What were you most proud of in your career?
Oh, most proud of in my career? Earning my Green Beret. Easy. That was the most proud I've ever been in my entire career. Yep. Very start of it.
When people say that, though, when they say it's earning the Green Beret, and I get that, but then I think all of the stuff being a Green Beret, a lot of people don't ever say that's what made them the most proud. But it's always interesting to me because, yes, that earning that, I get it, earning your badge when you're in law enforcement, all of that kind of stuff. But actually putting it into practice and doing the things, I hardly ever hear anybody say it was this that I did when I was a Green Beret, or it was in this country, or it was whatever it may be. It's always because I earned it.
I was proud of a lot of things in my career. I had I had a incredibly successful career overall when you look at it. Other than, recycling MOS phase and in the Q course, other than that, I passed
You had a
pretty
lot
much,
going on.
well, other than pre-dive, right? But that doesn't count as a school. That's a workup. But, I had very, 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 very successful career. I got to do a lot of awesome things. I spent almost my whole career on a team, which most guys don't get to do. I had 7.5, almost 8 years team time. Most guys get 4 to 5. But tons of stuff I'm proud of, but also just the moment of becoming a Green Beret. Also, dad was a Green Beret. There's a lot, and just becoming a part of that legacy, because when you put that beret on, that beret is way bigger than you as an individual. That beret is it's historic. It's legacy. When you talk about the Green Beret, going back all the way to JFK as the initiator of it, becoming a part of that community and that brotherhood is far, far better than anything I did in my career. And this is why, and this is what I've said about, the thing with like Tim Kennedy, with all the lies about during his career, was like, dude, you earned a Green Beret. You are like that by itself. You have respect from every peer, every veteran, everyone that you will meet. Just that Green Beret, even if some Green Berets never go to combat, it didn't work out for them, like the way the deployment schedules work. It doesn't matter, because that achievement is so incredible. And so, and I imagine it's the same for the Navy SEALs, for guys in Delta Force, but for me, yeah. I mean, I was a Green Beret, I think, for Halloween when I was like 8 or 9 years old, right? So like me earning a Green Beret, that was sort of, and I mean, you try not to make it your personality, but it's going to be like the number one thing about me for my entire life. My dad even says this, that with all the things he's accomplished, the thing he is most proud of is being a Green Beret, not a lawyer, not a politician. It's being a Green Beret.
You can answer this one if you want, or you can skip over it. What are you least
I'll
proud
answer
of?
anything.
What are you least proud of?
All right. What am I least proud of? Let's see. How do I phrase this? Probably the amount of time I missed with my kids and my family in that 10 years. When you think about the deployment schedule of 6 to 9 months a year, my kids are in high school and middle school, so you can imagine their entire lives up until this point. I was gone for a lot of things. I was gone for every birthday. I was gone for every Valentine's Day. I was gone for every anniversary. Thank God my wife is supportive and my kids understand. But I think that's a weight. I think that's a weight that a lot of guys carry too. When you're missing all the football games, you're missing all the dance recitals, you're missing all of that. That's not that I don't want to say I'm like not proud of that, because that's part of the job and that's what I signed up for. But looking back on it, there was a lot of time I missed with my kids when they were young, that I can't get back.
Do you think any of those times that you missed, you could have avoided missing it and just were focused on yourself and your career?
No. It wasn't. I never was a guy. Never was a guy who was a stay in the team room late because I didn't want to go home type of guy. You know how, I'm sure you know guys like that too. That was never me. I was always a guy who tried to get home to family as much as possible. I tell everybody this: if you want a little marriage and family advice from a guy who learned the hard way, but also did it successfully for 10 years in Army Special Forces, you have to put the effort in. And I tell guys this all the time. If you're going to be gone 6 months a year, or you're working a job like a police officer where you're gone 50 to 80 hours a week, and you're coming home and you're stressed and you can't put the job away, you have to put in more effort than the average guy who's working a 9 to 5 and gets to see his wife and kids every single day of his life. So when you are home, you need to be present and you need to be engaged. And again, you need to make sure everyone in your family knows that you're putting that effort in. If you do those things, even if you're gone 6 months out of the year, every year, you'll keep a successful family.
All right, let's wrap this up. Let's talk about what you're doing now. Let's talk about your channel and your firearms training, which your firearms training to me in that area of the world, because I go there once a year, once every 2 years, seems like the most crazy place to put a firearms tactical training center.
I think that, but Oregon actually, up until, like what they're trying to do with Measure 114 right now, they're trying to make us California right now. Oregon actually has pretty conservative firearms laws. Outside of that sort of I-5 corridor, Oregon is extremely conservative and extremely rural, other than, I-1 highway that goes through Portland, Eugene. Those are the two sort of urban hubs. But so from the firearm side of stuff, train law enforcement departments, but also civilians, all sorts of different stuff. If you're in the Pacific Northwest, I teach everything from trauma medicine, pistol courses, red dot mastery courses, advanced rifle courses, long gun courses. We're teaching night vision courses this quarter, so we're doing everything. And yeah, you think that, but also there's no competition, right? There's no other, there's no,
I did
there's
not
no
even put that
retired
into the
Green
equation.
Berets.
You're
There's no
correct.
retired Navy SEALs. I'm the only one. I moved down here and they're like, oh shit, we have a Green Beret here in town. Awesome. Right. So,
You are correct,
conversely, like
sir.
you try to do it in Texas or in like, North Carolina, right next to Third Group and Fort Bragg. It's like there's 100 firearms instructors that are Green Berets. So it actually is not as bad as you would think for that. And then obviously, yeah, with the channel, so obviously YouTube channel, that's been our main thing. What we're gonna do, once the biggest thing has been doing this master's degree full time. That's been a huge time commitment. I'm in my last term. I graduate in May. And then we're going to pretty much, I've been doing like 10%, 15% of my time goes into the social media channels, which, I mean, it's pretty awesome that I built the channel as big as I have in a short amount of time as I have with the short amount of effort that I put in. I wouldn't say effort, but I wouldn't say like short amount of effort, but like I just don't have the time. So like I just try to get a couple YouTube videos out a week. But as soon as I graduate, we're going like 100% into the social media. So we're going to be doing like a ton more extra stuff, incorporating in all my firearms related stuff into our Patreon, fitness stuff. I know a lot of people like my fitness content as well. So we're going to actually start putting full bore 110% time and effort. My wife's quitting her job. She's coming on to basically backside help run the business. So we're going to, I mean, I figure I've had this much success with, so far, why not actually try to make it the focus and see how far we can take it when we're actually putting all of our effort into it. So that's what we got going on next.
It's awesome. I love your stuff, and I told you that the thing that really stands out to me is good, bad, ugly, and different. You're going to say it, and I think that sets you apart from a lot of people.
I think, that's funny. That's what everyone says. They're like, man, I love your honesty. And for me, I think part of it is I'm so recently out that I don't care, right? I don't give a shit if no, and I'm not out to like get people. I'm really not. Like, I'm not constantly trying to target people or tear people down, but it's like, I also don't care. Like, I don't care about speaking out about Britt Sabinsky. I don't care about speaking out about Tim Kennedy. I'm going to do it if I feel like it's right. Which I think a lot of people, the further they get into this space, right, the more successful they get a more apprehensive about saying the wrong thing, saying something politically that might make their fans upset, saying something that might destroy a networking opportunity they have, that they kind of like back away from being unfiltered, which hasn't happened to me yet. I kind of just say and do whatever I want and hope for the best. So hopefully, hopefully I can keep that integrity for the channel and not get sucked into, what a lot of people do when it comes to, getting too deep into the media space, but we'll see.
Well, I'm so honored that you came on here to talk, man. This has been awesome. I'm glad that Brent set this up. I really wanted to talk to you, like I said, mostly about the honesty thing. I think it's a semi new approach into this kind of stuff that you're just kind of off the cuff and saying what you want. And I absolutely love your channel and everything that you're doing there. I think that's going to be it for this week, guys. Make sure a couple different ways. Let's talk about where we can find you: social media, websites, all of that kind of stuff.
YouTube and Instagram. I mean, I don't got much. So my Instagram, Valhalla VFT, YouTube, Valhalla VFT. I mean, both those places. If you want to really support and you want all the exclusive content, my Patreon. But those are pretty much it. Those are the three places. I don't really use Twitter. I don't use TikTok. I don't really have a website. I just kind of, that's kind of what I use is those two platforms. You know what I mean? I'm still a dinosaur, so that's what we got.
You have a website. I've looked through it. You got a little
Oh
bit of
yeah,
one.
haven't touched it in a year and a half. So don't even worry about the website.
Okay.
We're gonna redo it here eventually. But yeah.
I think you should mention too that you didn't know for a while that your messages and Instagram were going into I want to
Hidden
give you the
messages.
ability to say that if someone reaches out to you that it's not
Yeah.
because you're being a
So
dick.
I don't. So the reason I figured this out, I was doing a live stream and we did a giveaway for some of the new hats that we had, and I had the winners. And I'm like, none of the winners are messaging me on Instagram. What's going on? And then a few of the winners wrote on YouTube comments like, hey man, I keep messaging you on Instagram. You're not responding. And so I'm like, I'm going through and my wife's like, you got to respond to these people. And I'm like, they're not messaging me. And then finally I'm like digging through Instagram and I'm like, wait, what is this? What is hidden messages? And I click on it and I'm like, oh God, as I like start to scroll and there's just hundreds of messages because I didn't know that Instagram will send the majority of your messages there if you don't know somebody.
If you don't know
and
the
I was
person,
yeah, and I was like, oh shit. So I've been going through all those. So yes, sorry if you reach out again because I just figured that out a few days ago.
I bring this up because I have messaged you on Instagram and finally I had to get a hold of Brent and go, hey man, can you make this happen?
I bet you're probably deep in the hidden messages too. So yeah, my bad. I'm not trying to ignore you guys. I try my best to actually respond to messages and comments the best I can, but didn't even know that. So there you go.
Any last words that you want to give to someone that's out there kind of, navigating this space, whether that be the military space, trying to get a YouTube channel going, trying to get a business going, being an entrepreneur? Any last words of advice you want to give?
Yeah, just do it, man. Like, I know this is such a easy piece of advice, but one of the things that's led to the amount of success I've had in life is I've never been someone who shied away of just trying something. If I thought something was a good idea, like I said, I randomly woke up one morning and was like, I'm going to be a Green Beret. And I just went up and signed up and I just did it. And when I got out, I'm like, I'm just going to start a business and I'm just going to go to school. I'm just getting my master's degree. I'm just going to start a YouTube channel. I don't really care what people think. So if you're thinking about wanting to do something, whatever it is in your life, you got to take the first step. Just jump into it. So there's a famous quote I like to think about when I'm thinking about these things. I forget where I heard it. It's a story about the boy and the horse in the woods, right? And if you don't know this, there's a boy walking through the woods, and the woods is starting to get so dense that he can't see in front of him, and he's got his horse with him. And I kind of equate this to like making a next big decision or trying to figure something out in life. And he stops and he looks at the horse and he says, I can't go any further. I can't see where I'm going. And the horse says, look down at your feet. Can you see your next step? And the boy looks down and he says, yes, I can see my next step. And the horse says, well, just take that. And I think that is a great sort of story for everyone out there who's on the cusp of wanting to do something, not sure if they can do something, if so they should try to do something. Just take the first step. Take the first step and see where it goes.
Great story. I got to tell you though, if a horse talked to me in the woods, it would fucking freak me out.
yeah, probably. I think it's a Chinese story.
I don't think I would have taken one step. I would have started running if the horse was talking to me. So
yeah.
All right, guys, you know where you can find Nate. Let's talk about where you can find me. As always, you can find me on Facebook at the DTD Podcast. You can find me on Instagram at the DTD_podcast. And you can find me on YouTube where all these conversations, they're in video form. But your one-stop shop, dtdpodcast.net, that's going to have audio, video, pictures of Nate, a little more of his story, and all the links that you need to connect with him, see a little more of his stuff. And as I said, you can watch audio or video, whichever one you want to do from there, and see everything else that we've done. Also, make sure you're a friend and you tell a friend. Let them know what we're doing. Like, share, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. I hate saying it, but it's the only way that the channel grows. Also, make sure you check out the people that are helping me with this show that make it happen. My buddy Mac down there, maxbelts.com. Make sure you go there. They're the toughest leather belts on earth. It's my buddy, retired Navy SEAL. Mac Alexander is down there doing it well, too. Also, make sure you check out Trident Coffee at tridentcoffee.com. My buddy Derek over there, you put DTD15, will get you 15% off your order. Also, my buddy Hoot over at Nomadic Research at nomadicresearch.com. They are making outstanding outdoor gear. They have everything, hoodies, they have jackets, they have backpacks, they have shirts, hats, everything. It is absolutely amazing what they're doing on. and what they've got going on there. Also, finally, check out my buddy Greg, another Green Beret at hatchetbrewing.com down in Southern Pines. They opened up their second tap room. They are doing amazing stuff. Make sure you go on there and check out their swag at hatchetbrewing.com. Guys, that's going to be it for this week. That's Nate. I'm DJ. Catch us on the next one. We'll see you later. This episode brought to you by Nomadic Research, built for the wild and forged in adversity. Somewhere between the front lines and the firelight, a vision was born. The founders of Nomadic Research spent years in the harshest environments on Earth, where grit and resilience weren't just words, but a way of life. They saw a need for gear that could handle anything, gear that wasn't just built, but built to last. From battlefields to backcountry trails, every piece of Nomadic Research gear is designed with one mission: unyielding performance for those who refuse to quit. The founders believe in patriotism, personal responsibility, and the freedom of the great outdoors, because adventure isn't just a weekend escape, it's a way of life. Born in the heart of Afghanistan, forged in adversity, and built for the wild, Nomadic Research is gear for those who go further. You can start your adventure at nomadicresearch.com.